So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. The title that you see up here for this talk is deliberate, Refugees in Syracuse, because I think we all recognize that this is both a very broad and a very deep topic. And so we could talk all day about refugee resettlement, but with the time that we have today, I would really like to focus on refugees here in Syracuse and how their experience plays out, if that sounds good to you. So we'll do, just a quick overview, just so that we're on the same page about how people actually end up in Syracuse. The more that I'm in this work, the more that I'm realizing that it's really complicated. There are many international and national players, and there's a fair amount of misperceptions and misunderstandings about how the process itself works. So we'll spend just a few minutes on that. And I would encourage, as I talk, you to stop me with questions so that this is more of a back and forth as opposed to me just talking. The blinds?
Yeah, it's hard to see this because of the light.
Okay.
You never work in the this way?
Check that thing.
So as you see, up on the PowerPoint in terms of a definition of who is a refugee, basically it's a status that is conveyed to individuals by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And there are some criteria that you have to meet in order to be a refugee. So, it's typically people who are no longer in their country of origin. They've had to flee. They're in another country. They can prove that they were under life-threatening persecution, which is why they had to leave. That fear is credible of, almost no chances of returning home under the circumstances under which they left. And then, it can be based on various reasons, whether it's ethnicity, religion, political views, and so on. There's a great website that I've been using to learn more about this work because I as you've been able to tell, am in the learning mode myself. It's the Cultural Orientation Resource Center, so culturalorientation.net. And they do a really great job of describing refugees, describing refugee populations, and then they do something called refugee backgrounders. So they'll describe why certain populations have had to become refugees. So I would recommend, if you're interested in learning more about that you visit that website. And then just in terms of, the process and how it ends up, playing out at the very local level here in Syracuse and how we get refugees arriving to Syracuse. So, you have the individuals that have been accorded this status. They are in camps, someplace outside of their country of origin. And then there's a presidential decree. You probably are aware of the fact that the president and with Congress will decide on a ceiling, the number of refugees that the U.S. is going to accept on an annual basis. This past year, it was 85,000. And in this country, we have what I'll call the luxury of being able to determine the numbers of refugees that can come in. So countries like Germany, where people are fleeing Syria and they're ending up on the shores in Turkey and then making their way up, you can tell that that's a much harder situation to control. But here, we actually had 84,995 people arrive this past year, so 5 short of that ceiling that was set. And so the Department of State through the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration. So that's a state, that's within the Department of State. PRM is within the Department of State. Basically works with what are called national resettlement agencies. There are 9 of these agencies that are faith-based, that basically have a history of resettling refugees, the ones that started out without formal programs, just accepting people in like congregation members' homes. And so it's organizations like Church World Service and Episcopal Migration Ministries. There's a Lutheran one. There's 9 altogether. And those 9 organizations basically have a contract with PRM, and then these resettlement agencies contract with local, what are called affiliates or sites across the country. So we, as InterFaith Works, are an affiliate of Church World Services and Episcopal Migration Ministries. And then Catholic Charities here in Syracuse does similar work, and they're an affiliate of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Probably images that you've seen when we think about camps. I think what's striking to me and what I'm learning about refugee resettlement and refugees is that we can tend to think of camps as temporary places where you are until you get to your next place. I am meeting people who have been in camps 20 years. I'm meeting children who were born in camps and know no other home than this. And Dadaab in Kenya has 500,000 people as a camp. So it's a city of a camp. And so this is, where some people might come from depending on what country they're coming from. And then just to talk quickly about how refugees get to the United States, so they apply for refugee status in the camps. There's a very rigorous vetting process. This refugee status is probably the most vetted of any kind of visa that anybody can get, in contrast to what we hear about not knowing how many people are here and how they've come here. We do know. And so you have that 13 checkpoint system that involves the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, the International Office of Migration, and then medical checks with the Center for Disease Control. So it ends up being a long process. People can be in the pipeline going through these steps for years. And then, once they have been accorded that status and selected to come, they arrive to us in the United States through various ports. We get people that are coming through New York City, Chicago, and DC mostly. And then just an interesting note, the airfare to get them to the country is actually a loan that they have to pay back. So everyone that is arriving here has had the ticket paid for, but they're going to pay it back once they get themselves established here. We found that that's a good way for people to also learn about how the credit system here works and building your credit history. So if you're going to have to pay back a loan, at least you're getting established in how things work here. And that's one of the things you do have to figure out in your new life. And then pre-arrival, so we get profiles of who is being offered, if you will, to come to Syracuse. And it's typically because the individual might have other family members here. They might have friends or people that they know. So PRM does, and through the National resettlement agencies try to do the best job it can of placing people where they already know someone. It's hard enough being new any place, just a little bit easier if there are other people who've been there before you. So 8 months before, we're verifying all of that. If we get somebody's profile, we basically check out who here is family, and if they can verify that, they'll help support the refugee. And then about 6 weeks, sometimes as little as a week, that they get scheduled to come. And then it is our work and our role to, secure an apartment, and we'll assign a case manager, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we end up doing. But we receive biographical information on every person that's coming, so gender, citizenship, ethnicity, religion. Sarah can probably describe all of that profile information for people that arrived last year, because she's been looking at that information for us as our intern. And then the thing that's not included here is also that we have to know their language, because we are expected to provide services, and interpretation is one of those services that we have to provide. So we look at language, and sometimes information on these bios is not as detailed as we would like. So for language, English will be good, some, and none, and we don't know what some really means until the person is here and we're talking with them. And then we make sure that there's a home set up for them before they come. It's not easy, but basically that is an expectation of our role, and that's the first thing that we will have lined up for people who arrive. New York State is the third largest resettlement state in the USA, after California and Texas. The Refugee Processing Center has all kinds of great stats about refugee resettlement nationally, if you're interested. But about 5,000 in 2016 for New York State, and about 1,200 of those came to Syracuse. And then there are other programs in Rochester, Buffalo, and Albany as well. And in terms of who is coming, I'll say all over the world, but predominantly Bhutanese, Burmese, and they, as Praja can speak to, have been in camps in Nepal, which are in the process of closing down. So we had been getting higher numbers of Bhutanese and Burmese, and this is sort of winding down as far as continuing to see those populations arrive. The Congo, as you see in 2016, we received the most number of people from the Congo. And then in Africa, Somalia and Sudan as well. And then in the Middle East, Iraq, and then, of course, Syria. This 76 number is actually just starting in March. So that turned out to be a higher number than I anticipated, because it's only been in the last few months, really, that we've been receiving Syrians. I'm going to just flip through these slides quickly. It's just a profile of the population groups. We can come back to these if you choose. I'm just mindful of time. So I think if you just know where the groups are coming from, we can revisit if we have time. So it's just profiles describing the different populations. And that's in that refugee backgrounders description that I talked about. I should say that we do also receive Cubans. I'm sorry, might be messing this up. But we do receive Cubans that are, you come through a slightly different process. As you can imagine, they're not, the next door. Once they make it over here, they can seek asylum. And so we help resettle about 150 Cubans a year as well. Somalia, Sudan, and then Syria. And then the assigned case manager is to make sure that they're there along with volunteers to welcome the refugees to their new home. That's our biggest fear, is for someone to be at the airport and nobody there. It just drives us and causes sleepless nights. And then we're also required to make sure that on the night that they arrive, we provide a culturally appropriate hot meal. And so, something that would be closest to what you're used to eating on that first night. And then we'll do a quick, this is how the stove works. Typically pickups are at night, so this is how the stove works. Don't touch this, don't touch that. Get some sleep and we'll come back tomorrow and show you how everything works, if needed. And then we do that home visit the very next day to make sure that everybody is okay, and provide an orientation to where they are and the neighborhood. They get some cash. It's actually $30 per person. We grab their documents, we review to make sure that they have everything. We open up case files and all of that.
How long does it take to get the cash from DSS?
So after 30 days.
30 days.
And that's why the initial cash that they get is, so we'll also do things like making sure that they get, and in fact that they get what we call initial groceries, so food for the first few days while we take them to DSS. And DSS, the Department of Social Services, will actually do an emergency food stamps. So a little amount of money for people to get food to bridge the 30-day gap, and then after 30 days they are on the rolls. We talked about the loan before. And then another, surprising factor for me when I learned this is that each single individual receives $925. It'll be $950 this year, and this is all the money you'll get to resettle, basically. And it's supposed to go towards that first month of rent and your security deposit, and then to purchase household and personal items. So we were driven to work with the community to help with providing most of what they can donate, because anything that we can put in the home that the newcomer doesn't have to buy is a little bit more money in their pocket for cell phone minutes for when they're looking for a job, for instance. So lots of churches that we work with and individual members. So if you have somebody that doesn't know what to do with their furniture and household items, we're one place that will happily take those items. And then case managers are also helping with applying to Social Security, and then basically all of the essential services we work to provide, particularly in that first 30 to 90 days. So we're making sure that if you have school-aged children, that they are enrolled, your Social Security card, your state ID or driver's permit as applicable. So, our case workers and case managers are taking people to all kinds of appointments to get them set up, including medical and health assessments, which are required at the beginning. big focus within the organization too. We know that if you're going to get established and be independent and have hope in life, that you also need a job. And so we have an employment unit within our office that does job preparation and works to help people get jobs. So quiet in this room right now. Are we
can ask
okay?
questions, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
First and foremost, I'd like to know, since you're talking about employment and stuff, I'd like to know the average time frame that it takes for new refugees, those that have arrived. How long does it take before they finally get something that will sustain them? Secondly, I'm looking at how this whole refugee settlement program is, the modalities, the financing and the sustainability of the settlement program itself. I understand you say that they get some money which is supposed to sustain them for an entire year, and accommodation is provided. But I'm wondering, do they start paying after a month? When they come in, is everything paid for? How does that happen? And after that month, for example, when that month elapses, do you have situations where people still do not find, they have not settled enough to, and if that's the case, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So, and if I forget parts of your question, just let me know. But then this is one of those questions where it depends.
Okay.
As a response. So then what we know through how it all works out is that based on where the person is coming from, the level of education that they have had, their professional background, skills that they have, that the more you have, so if you have English and you have so you have the language and you have an education and you have some skills, it's going to be that much easier for you to get established. One of my clients is an Iraqi, what is called SIV, so people in Iraq who worked with the U.S. government and get this visa to come to the U.S. It's no longer safe for them to stay in Iraq. And he was a civil engineer by training and worked for USAID, worked for the U.S. Army. And so he comes in and, when we do bus orientation and we show people how the bus works and we get shown where to find out information about your bus line and what time. And this is halfway through the trip, and he's the one person that when he gets there and he looks at that, I'll see you later, I'm going home, and he knows which bus to get on, and he texts me later that he's home. And then someone else will probably need to do that a few times with somebody, right? Because if you're not able to read, then how are you able to know the time? And so it ends up playing out differently for this program. For the employment program, if you are employable, which is that 18 to 64 age range, we have a 65% placement and job retention rate. And so part of the work of the employment program is to find suitable positions. If you have an agrarian background, then, it's the onion farm in Oswego and the strawberry farm, and then jobs in manufacturing, so there's a lot involved there in finding the appropriate jobs. It can take 3 months, 6 months, and then for some people it might even take years. And then in terms of funding, so that first 925 is your living expenses for that first month. And then for any of the states that are accepting refugees, they get federal government funding to continue to support people's living expenses for 8 months. And then after that 8 months, you are on the public assistance roles, like any resident in that county. And so, we work to help people become self-sufficient, particularly in those first 8 months. What I will say is that when we talk about how people end up being refugees and when they are here and they finally have that chance to pursue their dreams, it's people who are very motivated to work, to find jobs, to start businesses, to go to school, to have their children go to school and to be successful, and it's more challenging for some than others, but innately for most people, that's what they want.
So for school-going children, does the state also cover those expenses?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, once. And in fact, for a place like Syracuse, we know in this community that we're challenged. We have a declining population. It's, stabilized somewhat. So the City School District has additional burden in providing the appropriate services, but the new population coming in is helping the school district in our city as well.
In terms of job retainment, how long do you track?
So it's 6 months for it's the first 6 months in terms of what is required of our funding. The funding itself is a 5-year grant. We work with people who've been here for 5 years, so they'll still come back to us and say, I need a job a year later, so it ends up informally being 5 years, but that retention rate is in that first 6 months of getting the job. And then some additional services that are provided by Catholic Charities and InterFaith Works. So literacy and ESL, and then obviously the mental health services, a huge need area. And then, we'll talk a little bit more about AC bills in a little while. And then green card after 1 year of being in country, and then after 5 years you're eligible for citizenship, which is another place where literacy also plays in. So you have people who struggle to pass that test, even though they're eligible for citizenship. And then just to touch on barriers to integration too. We talked about language, we talked about education. Transportation is a big one, especially as it relates to being able to get to jobs, so the bus, the transportation system, public transportation system here is inadequate, especially if you work second, third shift jobs. And so lack of transportation will impact what kind of jobs you can take and do. People that, maybe by experience or by the fact that they've been in a place that has inadequate health care, come with medical conditions that may be getting treated appropriately for the first time once they're here. And then when you're new to a place, it's just time. I arrived here 15 years ago, and it just took time, regardless of whatever else the package was. And so that inexperience with U.S. culture, that as case managers, as an agency, we work to provide as much cultural orientation as we can, but it's also one of those things that you absorb at the time that you need that information. So there's only so much that you can convey to somebody that they actually are taking in until they have a question or there's a context for, that piece of information. So that's an ongoing thing that just takes time. Suitable employment opportunities, we talked about that, depending on your experience, we need to try and place you in the right position to be successful. Housing, in order for housing to Okay, let me rephrase. So affordable housing is a challenge, I think, in many communities. And, you're in certain income brackets and you can pick where to live, and if a place is going to be affordable and you don't have, and you have low income, then you end up in neighborhoods that are challenged, so that's a reality as well. And then the interpersonal is the last slide, which is probably, where you might want to engage in the most conversations. So when we talk about having fled conflict and then arriving here, and are you now safe from conflict? And we find that, however we define conflict, there's some experiences that the refugee will go through in terms of how their life plays out that speaks to conflict. So we've had instances. In fact, let me put a caveat on this. I will say that Syracuse is a welcoming community, and that we haven't had the level of pushback that you see in other communities rallying, anti-refugee, anti-immigration cries. If you go on Syracuse.com when there's an article about refugees, yes, you're going to find all kinds of vitriol, but there's no organized, we don't want refugees in Syracuse. And that, in fact, we have the kind of leadership here that will put out something like this. So this is the mayor who has been extremely supportive and has spoken about the value of refugees and newcomers and immigrants in any community. And this is the holiday card that every city resident received last year. So,
Can I pass that around?
yes. So we're talking about generally a welcoming community. I don't want you to take any of what's on this slide to be this is what is happening to everybody at all times when they're here. And in fact, we know that bullying knows no, bullying is happening to all different kinds of kids in schools. And so there are incidents that will happen. We just in my daily work, reports of children who have been attacked on the bus or insulted on the bus, and we have to work to get them, getting a different bus in order to not have to be with the same kids. And so that's part of the experience, children, like mothers who come to our office and say, my child doesn't even want to go to school based on what is happening to them. And then the one child that I'm thinking about got attacked by the same people 2-3 times. And then a week later, his mother was driving out, so this is Somali woman who's learned how to drive, is independent, and has children that she needs to go and pick up or an errand to run, and she's backing out of the driveway and she hits the chimney on the outside. Is it called chimney on the outside? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the red brick thing that's on the side of the wall, and so damages the car, damages the house, and as a response gets assaulted by the husband. Mm. So she comes to the office with seeing incidences of domestic violence, and that's part of how the stress of being here and adjustment plays out sometimes. So we have to work with Vera House to get people help and connected. And this is an interesting one too, because there's cultural clashes there, right? So here it's and just with norms, it's a crime, and you have people who are coming from an environment where it might not have been, and in fact, if there's a misstep as the wife, that's the treatment that you get, and there's no recourse, so even when you talk about how to resolve such an issue, you can tell that you're fighting and pushing against, what people might be used to, that they have to think differently as well. One of the stories that, I think about when I think about vulnerability on the streets is actually somebody from your community project that talked about just making eye contact with two other gentlemen and getting pushed around and his water bottle knocked out of his hand and being asked, why are you looking at me? And so when you think about the idea of just going down the street and how we don't even think about looking at somebody's face, but that you can be persecuted, attacked by somebody for just that is just wrong, and it happens and has happened to people.
There are several cases.
I know. Because
it has been reported to the police.
Yeah.
They come in to intervene. Sometimes people are playing with, say, calling on a mobile phone, and somebody comes from behind and
just grabs it out of
and
somebody's hand.
They can't immediately call somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the stuff that comes up is, they can't call the police. Sometimes they're afraid to call the police. That's
one of the biggest barriers, because most of the people have been prosecuted either by the security forces, police, or some sort of people in uniform. So,
yes.
There is a hesitancy to call police.
The lack of trust, and then language is another barrier too. If you're in a situation, in a crisis, and you want to call, and you know that you're not able to communicate, that can also stop you. Do you have a question?
Do you do any integration programs with new refugees and police or security forces, firefighters, anything like that?
So. In fact, thank you for bringing up that question, because even with them, I did mean to, I mentioned working with Vera House, which works with victims of domestic violence. So, we're charged with and challenged to intervene in some ways, find solutions and find ways to, keep what may be happening from happening. So what are we doing? And in the instance of the bullying, we actually had a youth empowerment self-defense class that was very well attended, and we plan to do more of those, just in terms of how to react, respond when you are in situations. And then as far as working with the police chief has been great in that he's recognized the need to actually have us work with a liaison person, that when something happens, we call Officer Varush, and he is himself an immigrant, came in as a refugee, speaks 5 languages, has been there, and so there's that connection. And in fact, we're missing him this week because he's off this month, but that's how critical that connection is. And so we work with the police department in that way. And he does come in and do, so similar to the bus orientation, when we talk about cultural orientation, he'll come in and do a safety orientation as well. This is how to keep you and your items safe, kind of presentation. And then between, between the old versus the new refers to tensions, particularly with this. So the Syracuse Housing Authority has some housing units across the city, but there's one in particular on the south side where a significant number of the Somali Bantu population have settled, and there are tensions there with African Americans who've been in that building for a long time, and so this is one place where, as an agency, we've done kind of dialogues to try and bring people together, build understanding, because it's been needed, and the refugees, newcomers haven't necessarily been accepted. And then, within the same group refers to, as an example, the people from, let me just say one country. I won't name the country. And this isn't to say that it wouldn't happen with other countries. It's just this, the example that I'm about to give. It just wouldn't be fair to say who it is. But the one of the things that does happen that we see as a positive thing, because that's needed, is when people arrive, they also organize themselves and work to help their own. And we need that. So Praja is an active member of or was of the Bhutanese Community Association. And, that's doing tutoring and English classes and transportation and things like that for their own community members. And so we have those groups coming up. And in this particular situation, you had a group that established themselves, were doing similar work, but as they were doing this, ended up getting a significant grant, probably when as a group they were not ready. And I was in the grant-making world, and there are grants that can do more harm than good. And in this situation, this was one that ended up causing such fractures and divisions within people who are supposed to be supporting each other. And having worked with the two main leaders very closely in their years as they were getting established, it was heartbreaking when it happened, because the one person, continued with the group and the other was on the outs with whoever his followers were. Allegations of mismanagement and mistrust and all of that. And so even when you're on the outside, you didn't know really who to believe and who you should be remaining loyal to. And what that does is just really undermine the success of that community in terms of what they can do to help themselves and to help each other. And then the Bhutanese Community Association is an example of one ethnic community-based organization. The Somali Bantu Community Association. There's one called RISE. There's the Wazigua Community Association. There's a Sudanese group. And so that's, you have these groups that are coming up, and like I said, it's something that we actually have in our strategic plan to work to support and help build the capacity of these organizations, because the stronger they are, the better served all of the refugees will be. But even then, we've seen kind of, not necessarily collaborations that you would want to see, more competition, if you will. And then the religious groups, I mean, we have people of different religions coming in, and even as they do, within like the Muslim community, we invite people in the community who are Muslim, and we say, how can you help us with the growing number of Arabic and Muslim-speaking people that we're receiving as a community, and at that table is when we find out that, there's one Shia mosque, and there's some people that don't go to that mosque, and the tensions, and even that meeting was really tense because there's tough issues, and so these and as an agency, those are things those are nuances that we need to understand in terms of how they work, so that we can better determine how we work in these communities, if that makes sense. So it's human beings, right? And it's in our nature to not necessarily be harmonious all the time, and you see it play out at all the different levels. And I'll end on this note, though, that even with what I've talked about, we know that we are richer and better as a community. So you see, these national examples, but we have Bhutanese homeowners, we have Bhutanese business owners, we have children who are I cannot say that word. Say that again?
Salutatorians.
Thank you, that word. And
I know what you're talking about, so.
Yes, so, a top student in your class in high school. We have children who, this one person who was involved with one of our programs, young man, high school student, who said, I want to become a doctor because my father was one and he fled and he hasn't been able to practice as a doctor. That's his motivation. And we know he'll become one, So at the end of the day, this is critical good work that we were privileged to be able to do. Yes, Lisa's been holding my
First of all,
tongue for a while.
congratulations, Olive, on your position. I think you're a great improvement in addition there. But I wanted to ask, a couple of things would be, so three themes, okay? One would be gender issues as they relate. You didn't really talk too much about that, but we do have instances of, crimes like rape and, sex trafficking is kind of a big problem in Central New York, generally speaking. I don't know how many of those refugees, so if you could speak to that. And then we do have polygamy issues also. So trying to, like you mentioned Vera House, but how well are they able to adapt to those unique kind of polygamy issues? It's difficult, I would think, and also language, of course, because the women are much less. But coming in, there's a less of an incidence of knowing English. Yes. And then the other thing would be the elderly, a lot of elderly issues here where they're also isolated in a lot of ways, their own, and whether they're born here or not. But with them, it's unique. And then the last thing would be is, I was shocked to hear in terms of just from Jai Subedi spoke at Thursday Morning Roundtable recently or somewhere. I just heard him speak about the outmigration. That for the Bhutanese, which I'm most familiar with because I've been to Nepal, is that there were, I think, over 4,000 come in, but now it's down to 2,800. And I'll just end by mentioning that I think it's rather unique. I was doing some consulting for the city school district for Sharon Contreras before she left, and I was surprised that and you did it too, you categorized their community in two ways, both Bhutanese and Nepali, even though they came from the same camps. And in the school system, it's closer. You had about just a couple from Nepal and then the rest from Bhutan. But, why statistically? Because some of them, I guess, were born in Bhutan, and even though they were in camps in Nepal. But in the Syracuse school district, it's amazing how they don't combine them together, so they're not really getting the figures right. So if you're talking with them, you might want to make that point. But back to those questions for the group, the elderly outmigration.
Yeah, if I may add to what Lisa has talked about.
Yeah.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Raja Sapkota. I'm a studying student at SUNY ASF, but I'm also from the Buddhist community, and I have come here in May 2013 to the US with my family. So, like, regarding certain issues which Lisa raised, and as well as I think Olive has put in her slides, thank you very much for the beautiful presentation. You put a very nice process of how things happen when, some time ago I had made a presentation of the story of the Bhutanese refugees, the journey from Bhutan to United States,
Which was very good also.
which I presented in OCC. So that was a story which I had talked about, but here, like, you came on the process how people get from Nepal, the camps in Nepal to here. And some of the things which SC raised about the students. A lot of the students don't know anything about Bhutan, especially who come to school because they were born in the camps. So in the camps, like US, you don't get citizenship of Nepal. Otherwise, people wouldn't have come here because we were not given citizenship.
Yeah.
So in the camp, you are registered as a Bhutanese refugee, even though the child was born in the camp. So they don't know anything about Bhutan. And so they say, where are you from? They will say Nepal. If you talk to a current Burmese kid, he will say, I'm from Thailand. Because they were born
That's
in
where
the
they were
camps in
born.
Thailand. So, like, they don't know anything about it. So that is one aspect. And I don't know how the school has registered, but
It's separate.
but whenever we get our green card or the citizenship certificate, it's like country of origin is Bhutan. So it's like country of origin in the green card. I didn't bring mine. I don't carry it along, but is their country of origin is Bhutan. So similarly, I think for other refugees, I think the country of origin is given.
Yeah.
And related to gender issues, I think there has been a lot of problem related to gender issues in the camps, here also, and it is, I think, adjusting to the American system is a acculturation process, which is not very well taken care of, because what resettlement agencies have done for the 5 years is excellent job, but I don't think there is sufficient budget either by the city or the county to push people who cannot integrate in 4 to 5 years into that process, how to acculture them, how to make them adjust to the situation, because there are people who have got citizenship but still they are not able to adjust to certain things. So there are cases of mental health issues. 4 days ago, there was a suicide in Charlotte, North Carolina, which happened, unfortunately. A 50-year-old man committed suicide and because of the family issues. I don't know, it must have been depression. So, and in the mental health CDC also, there are some articles which say that among the immigrants, mental health issue is the highest among the Bhutanese because of the cultural system, acculturation process.
Yeah, and when people have gone through before they even came, the trauma, the PTSD,
and also the culture shock when they come from a country which is maybe because of internet, maybe they look developed, but like in terms of whole scale of human development, 50 years behind. Like Nepal, Bhutan are 50 years behind than US. So when you jump to a very highly industrialized, urbanized economy where you have been living a rural life, there's a big jump, there is a big problem. And so that adjustment becomes a big problem. So those are the few things, and I think like the acculturation process is there. And also I think the city council does not have an office like in some counties where they take care of like all the immigrant refugees, not only in case of Bhutanese refugees. And in terms of that, outmigration is one of the things. The acculturation process here has they are going because of relative or because of certain facilities there or because of the religious affinity also, because some places the county governments have allowed or have helped the community ECBOs to establish cultural centers, whereas which is lacking out here. Like cultural centers, people are pulling contributing money to have their cultural offices and all, but they're not getting certain places where they can.
Yeah, I think you touched on a key point that I would have wanted to make as well, and to speak to what you raised. I made sure that Praja was here today so he could respond from the refugee perspective by accident.
Something
Yeah, and I do too. But it's just
say 5 minutes.
Yeah, but as I think as a wrap up, there are serious challenges with funding and capacity, so that even an agency like ours or Catholic Charities, we were constrained in how much we can do, and we end up getting funding. We actively seek grants, but most of the funding that we have is to work with people when they first arrive. And many of the issues that you describe are issues that play out for people on the longer term, which is why I was speaking about how critical it is for the ECBOs to also be strong, because the more players that are providing that continuum of services and supports, the better. And the gender issues, especially given places where people come from, and patriarchy, and what people have experienced, what women have experienced. When we work with agencies, part of our job is to do that, not just making sure that there's language access in services that are being provided, but also the understanding of the population that's being served, to speak to the cultural stuff. So our mental health person works very closely with Vera House for that reason. She's Muslim, she's Arabic speaking, but sees everybody, and that's part of her role and our best effort to get at what you're asking about. And we actually applied for a grant to serve seniors that we unfortunately didn't receive, as grants will go, but that was also in recognition of, you have all of the challenges that aging presents, and then you add the isolation and the language barrier and the cultural barriers, and those, it's all compounded. And so that's another need area.
I'm curious about the economic impact of this outmigration, though, and how is that statistically been looked at? I mean, that's over 30% have left, and those are the employable ones. I mean, the ones I know that have left are the ones who have jobs.
It's like, if I just interrupt, but what has happened is some of the people have gone as a family reunion. Some people have gone for 9 months and come back to New York and say that, oh, New York is better than.
I think So we as an agency, I mean, that's one of the things we're talking about as far as program evaluation and performance management is the longer term and what happens to people that we've helped resettle in the longer term. So we want to get better at questions like that. But there's also the notion of, especially after you've become a citizen and you have skills to offer. So in the same way that we say students come to SU and we wish we could keep them, at the end of the day, we as a community have to be attractive enough for anybody to want to stay here. And being more diverse, being richer as a community is one of the ingredients of that. But at the end of the day, we'll keep people who want to be here, and hopefully we can get better at that.
I think that is a wonderful conclusion to our talk for the day. We hope you will join us again next week for another exciting talk. Wish to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.